Thank you, Vijay, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad I'm standing up because if I sit much longer, I'll fall asleep. It's okay for you to fall asleep, it's not so good if I fall asleep. And I will talk about social licence to operate. I think that's one of the most important things that we have on our agenda. I kind of like the other terminology. That's very neat. And maybe that's something we should look at. And I'd like to talk about that and make a couple of points and use, if you'll indulge me, just a few personal examples or personal experiences, I suppose, over the long time that I've been in the mining industry. It's always interesting to look back and see what kind of went wrong and do a retrospective in that way, so I'll do that. I was reminded last week of a quote that it's not quite exactly right, but it pretty much goes that we judge ourselves by our intentions, whereas others judge us by our actions. And it's a very important thing to understand, especially when we're talking about the mining industry. And I'll come back to that and maybe even add a little bit to that quote later on. My examples, the first one is going back quite a long time. I was with a company in Australia. I'm Australian. I was with a company in Australia called North Limited. Now, North Limited started business at about the same time as BHP and Rio Tinto. It was called CRA those days. But at about the same time, in the same town in Australia, they started at the same time. The other two grew massively. North Limited didn't grow so much, but they still were a substantial mining company. One of their mining activities was uranium mining in the very far north of Australia in a national park. And there's a whole story around that that's quite interesting as well. And they were not a well-liked or well-respected company, partly because of the uranium mining, but for other reasons as well that don't really matter. The fact is, they hadn't really done a lot about social licence to operate, whereas, and BHP had a couple of big stumbles as well, whereas Rio Tinto, CRA that became Rio Tinto, had performed pretty well over many, many years. It was an interesting dynamic to see the difference. Now, in that, or close to that uranium mine in the far north, the tropical north of Australia, there was a second mine. There was supposed to be three in the area actually, and only one ever started. There was a second mine that they acquired. They acquired the lease and had all the approvals to go and progress with that mine. It was an underground operation, so not a lot of disturbance on the surface, but it was in a national park, and there was huge public outcry. It was called Jabiluka, this place. It may have been heard in India. I know it was certainly on the international media at the time. And there were massive protests. The company's head office was in Melbourne, and on the other side of the country, north to south, was where this operation was. So the approvals were all in place. It looked like there was going to be a change of government, and so the government coming in was very unlikely to approve a new development. But they were also very unlikely, it was thought, to stop a current mine. So what the company decided was we'll progress with this as quick as we can, and we'll put in a portal and we'll put in a drive down to the ore body, and we'll call it an active mine in the few months before the election. And they proceeded with that, and that created an enormous public outcry. Hundreds of people travelled to this very remote part of Australia. They set up a camp, they locked themselves on equipment, they laid on the roads. They even had a rock band there. They had Midnight Oil. I don't know if any of you know of Midnight Oil, the rock band, but the lead singer of Midnight Oil became Federal Minister for Environment, actually, and proved why he was a good singer. But the Midnight Oil was involved. There was an enormous outcry. In the head office in Melbourne, probably about 50 to 100 people blockaded the building for a week in the middle of Melbourne. And the police had a fun game with the protesters, trying to get people into the office and out of the office and those sorts of things. It was a bit of a cat and mouse game, a practice for the police, a bit of fun for them, not so much fun for us working in the building. Now, as it turned out, Rio Tinto acquired that company. They acquired the company for their iron ore operations in another part of Australia, in Western Australia. But they also, in the process, managed to inherit the uranium mine and all of the problems that went with it. Now, the very interesting thing was one of the first things that happened when that deal was struck is that protesters invaded the Rio Tinto head office, also in the centre of Melbourne. And poor Rio Tinto, they couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. They were there at work one day and these protesters arrived in their reception. And it was completely unexpected. Now what Rio Tinto did very quickly was said, we won't mine this operation. It's very interesting in that. I will guarantee you that if North Limited had said, okay, we hear you, we won't mine the operation, we will fill in the drive and fill it in, no one would have believed them. They didn't have trust. Rio Tinto did that, and they were very, very heavily believed. They were immediately believed, and the argument stopped immediately. And it's a lot to do with your social licence to operate, how much trust you built up over many, many years. There were two companies, one that had, one that hasn't. Now, bring that discussion to my more recent experience in India. And Vedanta had an operation in Orissa called Niyamgiri. It was a bauxite. It is a bauxite deposit. It's on top of a hill, and there was all the approvals again were in place, ready to roll. Everything had been done, but there was massive outcry, massive protest, and you probably heard about that one. As it turned out, Vedanta handed the licence to operate, or the operating licence, back to the Orissa government, probably a year or so ago. So no longer have anything to do with it. Interestingly, at the AGM just a month or two ago, 6-8 weeks ago, there were multiple questions from the floor on Niyamgiri. The first question, the chairman said, we handed it back to the government, we no longer operate it. That didn't stop the questions. Just like the other example, people were looking for, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I know you're here to trick me, so what's actually going on? And didn't believe, even though the operation's been handed back, didn't believe that. It's absolutely critical to our operations to be trusted. So when I said that quote, we judge ourselves by our intentions, others judge us by our actions. Our actions are seen in the context of how much we are trusted and how we've performed. Now, second thing that in terms of responsible mining and licence to operate, as Vedanta we've had social responsibility days in London for the last 2 years. So we are listed in London and have a day with the investors, a day on sustainability with investors. The first day I went to last year, and I was on the stage but didn't present anything. It was presentations by the CEO and others, the CEOs of some of our businesses, and it was quite well received. It came to question time. I was only responsible for safety and health at that stage. It came to question time, and I got pretty much all the questions for the first 15, 20 minutes. All people wanted to know about. And this was a surprise to me, actually. I've been in the safety and health game and risk engineering and so forth for a very long time. All people wanted to know about was our fatality record and what we were doing about it, what we were doing about safety. And there were multiple questions on that front. Now, I know this has been more and more important in the eyes of investors in recent years, but it became very obvious that this is completely in the eyes of the investors. Whereas safety was, at one stage, very important, but not one of the most crucial things, that's changed. So this year at the Sustainability Day, I did manage to give a short presentation on safety, health and environment. And still there are a lot of questions. Now, because of the programs we could demonstrate, because of what we're trying to do, although our record in the past year hadn't been very good, frankly, people were actually prepared to give us a little bit of leeway. But when it comes to the social licence to operate, we haven't yet developed that in the organisation, despite the fact that we've done some pretty good things. Okay, we were talking about closure just a moment ago. We closed an operation in Ireland, and it was done world's best practice, pretty much, with lots of accolades from NGOs, from government, from others. This was in Lachine. It was a underground zinc operation. It was a fantastic piece of work. We managed to open a mine in South Africa, first one that's been open for quite a while. Again, a zinc mine, and my colleague here would talk to you all day about the process to get that approved. The biodiversity work was incredible, fantastic work, really, really good. We've done a lot of other things that are good, and our detractors will say, well, that's okay, you're supposed to do that. Now, watch this video that we made about you, and I will show you how bad you are. So that's where we are at the moment. I would say that there's a couple of pillars that need to be protected, developed and then protected in the mining industry for us to be successful, for us to be able to exercise our right to operate, for us to be able to say we are a responsible miner. And the biggest one is trust. It's very hard to develop, it's very easy to lose. If you look at BHP and Vale, both good companies, had a massive accident in Brazil that caused a lot of damage, a lot of death and a lot of damage. They both have pretty good reputations, reasonably good reputations. So the world didn't want to close them down. But there are a lot of businesses, if that happened to, the world would want to close them down because they don't trust them. So building that is absolutely crucial to our long-term future. And it also means that even if we don't quite succeed in what we're trying to do, so I said, you know, we judge ourselves by our intentions, others judge us by our actions. Even if the actions aren't getting the results that we want at any point in time, we can be given some leeway if there's trust. But if there's not trust, we'll get nothing. So I'd leave those thoughts with you. Thank you.